My sister and I both inherited curly hair from some unidentified great-grandparent or other ancestor. No one else in the family we know of has anything close to the amount of curl that we do. My mother always considered herself to be rather clever in producing daughters with curly hair and sons with straight hair. Coming of age as she did when Shirley Temple curls were the rage among some mothers who went to extremes to produce her ringlets on their daughters. So Mary Bruce and I were given short haircuts that emphasized the curl and kept our hair easy to manage. Until, that is, we became teenagers and were able to rebel more successfully than when we were younger. This was, after all, the 60s, when long, straight hair was de rigueur. During high school and beyond, we both let our hair grow long, but managed it very differently. I did everything I could to make mine as straight as possible, mostly involving very large rollers, somewhat resembling those old frozen orange juice cans you might get, about the same size. Bruce, on the other hand, let hers grow and do its own thing, which mostly meant bushing out in long waves, that sort of triangular look. Telling my mother, and anyone else who had a problem with it, that she was just letting her hair do what it did naturally. It was a very obvious outward sign of her and most teens' inward struggle to find out who they are and to grow into that authentic self. Our gospel reading today comes just after the passage we heard last week when Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus goes on to let Peter know that he got that exactly right, even though attributing it to divine inspiration. But Peter does not yet know the true meaning of Jesus being the Messiah. The passage for today, which follows immediately after last week's, actually begins, "From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer, be killed, and be raised the third day." From that time on, an ongoing showing, as Matthew chooses to put it, not just telling, as Mark has it in his gospel, showing them what being the Messiah is really about, which Peter, the same Peter who recognized Jesus as the Messiah just days ago, does not want to accept. He can recognize the Messiah in the one who heals, who walks on water, who multiplies loaves and fish, who challenges the authorities, but not when Jesus talks about suffering and dying, ignoring the statement that he will also be raised from the dead. This is not the Messiah so long awaited. This is also the beloved teacher whom he does not want to lose. So Peter challenges him, and in response, is more strongly rebuked by Jesus. "Get thee behind me, Satan." Strong words indeed. Jesus then goes on to say the words we have just heard. "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? Take up your cross, lose your life." These are not easy words to hear, and especially not in our time and culture. While we are not likely to find ourselves literally facing crucifixion or even physical death of any kind because of our faith, our following Jesus, Nor is this an invitation to martyrdom or even extreme asceticism or self-hate. It is rather an invitation to live our lives as authentically as possible, following Jesus' example. Being what he knew the Messiah had to be cost Jesus his life. Being authentic and following is costly. The word used for life in this passage is psyche in the Greek, which they created to describe the difference between a dead body and a living one. It refers to whatever it is that gives life to a body: breath, spirit, personality, soul, life force, and so on. We might say that psyche is whatever makes me, me. I like using the word self in place of life in this passage, for certainly if we lose our life, we have lost ourself. But just as certainly, if we lose ourselves, our lives are immeasurably impoverished, if not lost. And yet, how often in relationships do people really give themselves, or do they hold back, protecting or saving themselves? Harkening again back to the 60s and 70s, a book by John Powell, a Jesuit, had the title, "Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am?" The answer he gives is, "I am afraid to tell you who I am, because if I tell you who I am, you may not like who I am, and it's all that I have." So rather than risk being hurt or rejected, we don't tell others who we are. We hide ourselves. We try and protect and save ourselves from pain, and by doing so, we can easily lose ourselves. We become a non-self in our relationship with other people. Around the same time that this book was written, I was joining a lay Christian community in England made up of an international group of people. After a 3-month probationary period, we would become full members for our remaining time there. And one of the promises we were asked to make as part of the ceremony was a willingness to be open to be known for who we are. A willingness not only to be open about the faith we shared, but also to bring ourselves fully and openly to the experience, to each other, and to the many guests we hosted. Without this willingness to be open and open to receive others, we risk losing ourselves. This can be true whether in close personal relationships with family and friends, in our workplaces and congregations, how we interact with all the folk we encounter in our daily lives, on the street, in shops, anywhere we have the opportunity to engage with others. It can be all too easy at times to hide behind the acceptable mask, to be caught up in all the snares our Western modern culture presents us with, to go along with the flow in any situation rather than speak up. Being countercultural isn't joining a hippie commune, as it might have been in my youth. It's standing with the poor and marginalized, feeding the hungry, visiting the sick and imprisoned, speaking up when our self-preservation instincts tell us to be silent. If we can see the cross as representative of the absolute certainty of the incarnation and not a stumbling block, a model for resistance to the status quo, an invitation to be a voice that calls for justice, for mercy, for compassion, for love. Perhaps the most countercultural thing that we as our most authentic selves can achieve is to lose ourselves, not by not being ourselves, but by focusing outside ourselves, focusing on the other and on following Jesus, carrying whatever cross doing that entails, following on the way to our true life, our truest selves, and thus also helping to bring about even just a bit of God's reign into our families, our workplaces, our communities, and beyond.